first grade. Today's story is called Rivers and Mountains. Our learning objectives today are to review the tasks Lewis and Clark have accomplished so far, explain why Lewis and Clark were unable to accomplish the last task, demonstrate an understanding of the word dull, and then record information about the tasks that Lewis and Clark have accomplished. Our key vocabulary today: confidently, dull, and waterfall. Confidently. Confidently is an adjective, and it means being sure of yourself. At the concert, the boy confidently sang the song. Dull is another adjective, and it means boring. The movie was very dull and very long. Waterfall. A waterfall is a place where a river falls down from a high point or over a cliff. There is a very famous waterfall in both the United States and Canada called Niagara Falls. Okay, this should be pretty quick at this point. Find the Atlantic Ocean on the map. It's right here. Now find the Appalachian Mountains. Right here. Now find the Mississippi River. Right here. The Rocky Mountains. Right there. The Louisiana Purchase. Yep. In between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. And then where is the Missouri River? The Missouri River is right here. It cuts through the Louisiana Purchase. And then the Pacific Ocean, right here. So where do you think Lewis and Clark will be on the map after today's read aloud? What's your prediction? Okay, I want you to keep that in your head and see if you're right. What tasks have Lewis and Clark accomplished so far? They've made friends with the Native Americans, and they've collected samples of plants and animals that live in the Great Plains or in the Louisiana Territory. Why did Lewis and Clark decide to bring Sacagawea on the expedition with them? So that she could translate, and she knew the land pretty well, and so that she could tell the Shoshone tribe, which is her original tribe, that they were coming in peace. Okay. Do you know what a translator does? They listen to what somebody is saying in one language, and then they repeat it in a different language. Remember our key vocabulary? We have confidently, dull, and waterfall. In today's read aloud, Lewis and Clark discover that they may not be able to accomplish one of their 3 tasks. I want you to listen carefully to find out why one task is impossible to accomplish. Oopsie. Excuse me. All right. The Corps of Discovery had now been on their journey for over a year. Can you imagine traveling and being away from your home for a year? The explorers were very good friends with one another and had learned to depend on one another. One day, John Shields and George Shannon went ahead of the others in a pirogue. John Shields was the blacksmith, and he knew his way around the outdoors. George Shannon was smart and friendly. Shields and Shannon paddled up the river, talking over the exciting events they had gone through so far. "Well," Private Shannon said, "no one can complain that it has been dull." No sooner were those words out of his mouth than the tip of their pirogue came around a bend in the river, and they saw a sight that caused them to stop paddling for a moment. Up ahead, the Missouri River split into 2 wide rivers. One of the 2 rivers was the Missouri, and the other was not. It was impossible to tell which one was the Missouri River. "Which river is the Missouri?" Shannon asked. "The Missouri River is the one that Captain thinks can carry us further west." "I don't know," Shields replied. "And I don't think the captains will know either. We've passed the part of the river our Native American friends have told us about, and none of us have seen the part of the country before." Soon the other boats arrived. Going ashore, Lewis and Clark walked ahead and inspected the 2 rivers. Clark said, "If we take the wrong river, it may turn too cold for us to travel by the time we are ready to start from here again." Native Americans told them that the Missouri River ended in the Rocky Mountains. Lewis and Clark knew that they would have to travel by land instead of water to cross the mountains. Because they wouldn't be able to cross the mountains on a river, that meant there was no all-water route to the Pacific Ocean. So which one of these three tasks will Lewis and Clark not be able to accomplish? They won't be able to find an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean. But why? Because there isn't one. The water stops, right? The water does not go all the way to the ocean. It stops in the Rocky Mountains. We need to find the Shoshone people up ahead so we can buy horses from them. They agreed. But first they would have to continue along the Missouri River to the Rocky Mountains. Lewis suggested, "The last Native Americans we talked to said there was a huge waterfall up ahead on the Missouri River. We need to find that waterfall. Take some men along the South Fork, Clark, and I'll try the North." So the fork of a river is where a river splits, okay? So some of them are going to go on the, what do you say? Sorry, some of them are going to go the South Fork, and some of them are going to go the North Fork. So North and South. If one of us finds it, that person will know that he is on the correct river. We will meet back here in a few days to see which group has found the waterfall. So who do you think is going to find the waterfall, Lewis or Clark? What's your guess? Let's find out. Unfortunately, when they met back up after a few days, neither group had found the waterfall. Lewis had another idea. He decided to try looking for the waterfall by land rather than following one of the two rivers. Lewis and his men walked for 2 days before they heard what Lewis later described as the agreeable sound of falling water. Following the sound, they came to not just one waterfall, but a whole series of great waterfalls. This was it. They could now figure out which of the two rivers was the Missouri River. Lewis sent a man back for the rest of the party. When Clark and the rest arrived at the great waterfalls, however, they found Lewis and his men burying the keelboat and some of their supplies for the trip back. "It's too heavy," explained Lewis. "We need to carry the boats around the waterfalls in order to continue up the Missouri River." Finally, after 11 days of hard work, they left the great waterfalls behind. It was a difficult journey. The river was becoming harder to follow as it narrowed and filled with rocks. On the other hand, Sacagawea was closer to the area where she had lived with the Shoshone. She was now able to guide the Corps of Discovery better because she started to recognize the land where she had lived as a child. The more places she recognized, the more confidently she guided them. So she became more certain of which way to go as she got closer to the Shoshone lands where she used to live. In August of 1805, Lewis told Clark, "I will take 3 men ahead on foot instead of following this winding river. If we find the Shoshone, we'll return with horses. We can use the horses to cross the mountains. Then we can look for the other river we think flows down from the mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean." A few days later, Lewis and his men were crossing a meadow when they spied a Shoshone horseman up ahead. Unfortunately, when he saw Lewis and his men, the Shoshone horseman turned away and rode. The 4 men kept looking for the Shoshone. A few days later, they reached the Rocky Mountains, which, since the Louisiana Purchase, formed the western edge of the United States. So now they have officially hit the edge, or where the land of the United States is ending. Okay, because remember, at this point we only owned the Orange Land and the Green Land. Okay, so they've traveled all along these little red dots, all along the Missouri River. The next afternoon, they came upon an old Shoshone woman gathering wood for a fire. Smiling, Lewis said in English, "We are friends." She did not know English, but she understood when Lewis smiled that he was friendly. She led the 4 travelers to her village and introduced Lewis to their chief. The Shoshone had plenty of horses, but the Shoshone chief explained with sign language that the Shoshone did not have much food to share. 2 days later, Clark and the rest of the expedition arrived with Sacagawea. Now, Sacagawea could translate the chief's words. Sacagawea joined Lewis, Clark, and the chief in his cabin. It was dark. The only light was from the fire. With her help, the chief told the captains that his people did not know the way to the ocean, but that a river did run down to it, and that another tribe, the Nez Perce, could lead the party to the river. As she translated this, Sacagawea suddenly cried out. In the shadows of the chief's home, she had not seen his face clearly. Now, as he turned more toward the light, she recognized him. The chief was Sacagawea's brother. She threw her arms around him and in a rush of words explained who she was. What a joyful surprise this was for everyone. In all the Shoshone lands, Lewis and Clark had stumbled into the village of Sacagawea's brother. Now the chief said, "My sister, I will help you and your friends get all the horses, supplies, and guides you need in order to complete your journey." And that is our story for today. So, how did Lewis and Clark cross the Rocky Mountains? By boat or by foot? By foot. Okay. Which task did Lewis and Clark discover that they were not going to be able to accomplish? They weren't going to be able to find an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean. Do you remember why? Because there isn't an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean, right? What was Sacagawea's job once the Corps of Discovery had reached the Shoshone tribe? She was a translator. And who was the Shoshone chief? It was her brother. How were the Shoshone treating the explorers? They were treating them nicely. They welcomed them and they told them that they could help. They would help in any way that they could, but they didn't have a lot of food to spare. Okay. Where did Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery still want to travel to? So where did they still want to go? The Pacific Ocean. In the read aloud, you heard Private Shannon say, "No one could complain that the trip has been dull." I want you to say the word dull for me. Dull. Can you clap it out? Dull. How many syllables is that? 1. Okay. Can you say it in a mouse voice? Dull. Okay. Dull means boring. I had already seen this movie, so I found it very dull to watch again. Can you think of a time where something was dull to you? Try to use the word dull in a sentence. Okay. Did we review the tasks Lewis and Clark have accomplished so far? Mm-hmm. Did we explain why Lewis and Clark were unable to accomplish the last task? Yes. Did we demonstrate an understanding of the word dull? We did. And then here in a little bit, you're going to record information about the tasks that Lewis and Clark have accomplished. All right, guys. See you next time.